I can't wait. I'm excited. Jaye Williams has a little something for Schmoeville later. he teased it earlier. Can't wait to hear it. But before we get to that, are you a little shocked that Christian and Ellis didn't really give us any notes based on last week? Like, they brought us up during the show, God love them, and we'll probably talk about that later. But personally, were you shocked to not get really any feedback from last week's show?
No, I'm not. I mean, listen, we've talked to many people who, whether it's on air or off air, we've talked to many people that are on the SK Plus sort of channel. We've talked to people that are just involved in the space in general. And people are like, yeah, when they give us notes, and I'm just like, I have no idea what that's about. And that's not me saying, oh, we're fantastic and we're perfect or anything like that. It's just, they let us do our show. They just let us do it. And the fact that we did our show without them even having a show, I think, well, I mean, they had a show, but
Mark and Christian had a live show.
They haven't had a live show in months. They had one.
Maybe this is just my guilty conscience, and maybe I should have. Did I say the word notes, or did you say the word notes?
You said the word notes.
Yeah, I said the word notes. Maybe I didn't mean notes. I think this is my guilty conscience because last week I just pretty much called out Frosty and said that his job was obsolete and all of that. I think that was weighing on me over time, and I'm just surprised I didn't get anything from that. So maybe you're right. Maybe we could just do whatever we want, and I can blast the reason that we're here in general.
It's an interesting relationship for the simple fact that, so I've mentioned this before, but I'll say it again. The only time I've ever gotten like legitimate notes was when I essentially asked Christian for them. I was like, hey, if you ever have anything, that you think we can improve on. He's like, well, actually, I've got 10 things. And I was just like, okay, just relax.
Yeah.
The other aspect of that is them just poking fun at us like on air, which I'm totally fine with. Like the whole Starbucks story thing.
I am sometimes.
No, I'm perfectly fine with it, mainly because it never involves me. But regardless, I also am just totally fine with Christian like telling me something and being like, yeah, he's a smart guy, I'll implement it. Or if I don't agree with it, I'll just be like, nah, I'm not gonna do that. I'll just outright just ignore it. But I feel like he gets it. He's fine with it. He just might be like, well, why didn't you do that thing? I was like, I didn't want to.
One thing I picked up from you was just saying, yeah.
Yeah.
Welcome to After Harloff and Ellis. My name is Ryan Snelling, and I'm joined by, as always...
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us, guys. Thank you for all your support last week, even though there was no Harloff and Ellis show. Jay and I still hung in there, and we had plenty to talk about. I'm officially done with short-sighting ourselves. So many episodes have gone by where I've said, I don't know how much we can do. I'm officially over that because we continue to prove me wrong when I say that. Did I do that grammatically correct?
Yeah, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, does it?
We continue to just accomplish an hour show no matter what I say. And even if we don't, it doesn't matter. I guess it doesn't matter. We just talk until we run out of things to say. And then that's an episode. And I'm feeling confident, Jay. I'm glad to be back. I think we might have gotten the best Harloff and Ellis episode so far, but yeah, we'll get to that a little bit later on. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling fantastic. Listen, we've been doing this whole podcast thing for a long time, despite the fact that you and I have only been podcasting together for a little over a year now, and then on After Schmoe for a little bit less than a year. But look, our business model, essentially, the cornerstone of it is just, if we do it long enough, other people will just stop doing it, and we'll be the only ones left around. So
yeah.
I like to think that we've got a little bit of experience under our belt, enough to know that every week people should expect a show. Yeah. And regardless of what the circumstances are, we should put an episode out.
do I have this down right? I think in like 2 months, you will have officially co-hosted the show for a year. Is that right?
I don't know. I deleted Time Hop off my phone.
Well, I guess I'm just judging based on the episode numbers. Like, we started at episode 3 or 4, so we have to make it to 52, right? Or 55. So it's about 10 weeks, 2.5 months.
You know this about me. I don't like living in the past. I don't look at milestones. I'm just not that guy.
Well, I do have a Time Hop, and 2 really funny things came up this week. I realized that 2 years ago was the first time I met Ellis. I went down to Nashville. It's a really, really funny story because, again, we were complete strangers. He did me a favor, and he forced me to drive 3 hours to Nashville just so that we could podcast together, and I had to sit through his stand-up.
I thought his stand-up was pretty good.
I was obviously thrilled, drove all the way to Nashville. It was funny because we were actually expecting a winter storm that night, so I drove to Nashville purely for his set, and then we recorded a podcast, and I drove right back home all in one night, and I had to beat their winter storm home in the middle of the night, and it almost got me, but I'm safe, obviously, and we put out an okay show. I think he likes to give me a little bit more credit than I think I deserve with that show. That episode, it's an episode of the Film Beef podcast, which is the podcast I did before Sight and Sound. I thought I knew enough about Ellis to be able to go in and have a good show, and it turns out I didn't know anything at all because I was asking him to do celebrity impressions and things like that, and didn't know that he had his own impression dating game on the Schmoe's No Live show. It's funny to go back and listen to that because you could tell that I was nervous, and but yeah, he was very gracious. I'll never forget. He's always been a good sport when it comes to laughing at the things that I say, and it's such a rewarding thing to make a stand-up comedian laugh because, well, he's the only stand-up comedian I know, but he's always been gracious with with his laughter. But anyway, it's the 2-year anniversary of when I met Ellis, and then it was like a couple months after that when I first got this gig. But the other funny thing that happened is one of my employees, Jay, and you'll know a little bit more about this. One of my employees the other day just walked up to me and like asked me a question, and we were joking back and forth, and then she out of nowhere just refers to me as, "Oh, okay, honorary Schmoe."
Oh no! I hate those types of interactions. I just had one of those interactions. I was at dinner in my small town, and somebody said, "Yeah, I've been trying to listen to your podcast," and I just was like, "Please don't do that."
Well, that's a little bit different. I was a little bit weirded out because this person, I realized that my name is in the title of that video, the honorary Schmoe.
Yeah, they were Googling you.
They Googled me. That's different. And not the same at all as to what you just brought up, but that's fine. I'm going to take the opportunity, since you brought up our podcasting, and because Christian and Mark brought it up, I do want to bring up Sight and Sound for a minute. Because, we're growing. 2018 is looking bright for us. We have so many things in mind, so many plans as to what we want to do. We're about to launch our own Patreon as well. We're going to join the party with the Wangers and the Knapsack Files and eventually the Schmoe Down and all that good stuff. And we'll probably talk a little bit more about Patreon here later. But I just wanted to say that I'm very grateful to all of the people that listen to Sight and Sound Weekly on SK Plus every Monday. It's a small number, but it does mean a whole hell of a lot because it's more. I think the number is higher than if we were to host it on our YouTube channel. We're about to hit 1,000 subscribers, but I just wanted to say that I appreciate the people that listen to that every week and comment every week, and it just means a lot to me and Jay that you guys are accepting of our show. We try to be a little bit different with our content, and right now I was joking around with Jay earlier in the week that we've always joked on this show that we want the shows on the SK Podcast Network to be unique, and they always just end up turning into just another movie podcast. That happened with Beardo. I hope it doesn't happen a meeting of. I want to make sure that we're all doing our own things. And so if at any point Ace and RB3 decide to, we're just going to review movies, then I think there's going to be no longer a need for Sight and Sound to even exist on the SK Plus network. But that's all I wanted to say. Is I thank you so much for listening to us, and I hope that more people will come check us out and see what we're all about.
Yeah, I mean, Sight and Sound is our bread and butter. It's our baby, if you will. And if you enjoy what you hear on this podcast every single week and you haven't checked it out, make sure to go ahead and go do that. On the subject of Patreon, I'm going to get into my first little, maybe not necessarily a rant, but I do want to address something. I was watching Carpool this week.
Oh, boy.
Not many carpools this week,
Yeah.
only a few. And, I think the very first one that came out started off with, discussing some Patreon stuff, and rightfully so. It's an exciting thing. I think Mark and Christian both are, I don't know why I let off with Mark there. Christian and Mark both are very excited about the Patreon that they're going to
Why couldn't you lead off with Mark?
Well, primarily because Christian's been the one that's like, it's been labeled as the Schmoe Down Patreon, even though we got news this week that the Patreon might have some impact on the Schmoe's live show. I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit more, but it's been fascinating to sort of go through comments in the last couple of weeks since we did our last show prior to last week's Harloff and Ellis, and we'll get into that as well. But some of the comments surrounding Patreon, and I get this to a certain extent, revolve around people having the fear that they're going to have to start paying for content. And I made this note in the Carpool comments. I basically said, listen, Patreon isn't about paying for content. For the most part, most people that do Patreon, whether it's us, whether it's Wangers, whether it's Schmoedown, you're still going to get the same content that you've always gotten. The only difference is if you want more, you're just going to have to pay for more. You're not going to have to pay for the same content. You're just going to pay for more if you choose to. So I think that's a big distinction, but I also think it's on everybody who starts up a Patreon that they need to distinguish that fact. You're not paying for content. You're paying for more content and investing in the future of content.
It just shocks me that people think that. Well, it shocks me, for one, that they think that the Schmoes would do anything like that in general. But also, can you, Jay, think of any content creator in existence that creates content only on Patreon? Like, that's just never, ever the case.
Right.
I've never, ever heard of that.
Well, one of the things that I've sort of come around to here lately is the fact that, listen, I think there's a lot of people in the movie space, in the After Schmoe listener space, and especially in the Sight and Sound space, there's a lot of people who are also content creators. I mean, think about all the people that we know that listen to the stuff that we put out that are also podcasters. They also have their own YouTube channels, or they're journalists, or whatever the case may be. And that's all well and good because they can relate to what we go through on a day-to-day basis. But I'm starting to realize that one of the reasons I think that we're so sympathetic with the things going on at Collider and the things going on at Schmoes, and how sometimes we can't necessarily relate to what certain fans and commenters sort of are saying, is because
we're shills.
That's right. We're obviously shills. But also the fact that we're content creators just like Mark and Christian are, and everybody at Collider. So we understand why they do certain things a little bit more. I'm not trying to be patronizing. I'm not, no pun intended. I'm not trying to be, I'm not trying to sort of shun people, but the fact that we are doing some of the similar things that these other people are doing, I just think that we're more sympathetic, we're more understanding, we have a different sort of perspective as other people. So I think I am giving the benefit of the doubt to those people by just simply saying maybe it just involves a little bit more educating and education and being more transparent with stuff. But I think that we're going to get that from the Schmoes for sure.
I'd like to give myself a little bit of credit. I'd like to consider myself sort of a fan liaison. Like, I hope that I'm the voice of a majority of the fandom. That way, the people at Collider can hear what we're thinking and what we're saying. But I guess it's up to Schmoeville to tell me how good I am at that, and if you agree with a lot of the things that I've said. I know that sometimes we can get caught up in a bubble. You're absolutely right. Yeah, we usually think of it as content creators myself, but we're all fans here as well. So I'd like to think we're objective. I'm more so just concerned that sometimes there are just clueless comments. Like there are some people that might comment, does this mean we have to pay for every Schmoedown on YouTube? When if you just gave it one more second of thought before typing that, you could have probably realized that that's not the case. It's strange to me. I think this is going to be where we spend a lot of our time. It's sort of how today anyway. We're going to talk a lot about fans and
fan reactions,
Schmoes, and how they interact with each other. Absolutely. But this made me think of sometimes I just have a good time, and I don't mean this as a burn. I just think this is hilarious. I love certain comments, certain clueless comments, especially like the people that tweet at Christian or just random posts in Schmoeville. And sometimes they just crack me up because I guess when people are unaware of some of the things that are going on in the space, it's actually, yes, it's funny to me, but it's also just kind of humbling because it makes me realize, maybe I just care way too much because not everyone is as involved and doesn't have to be as involved with Schmoes Know. So this isn't really just an opportunity for me to burn people. I just think it's funny in general and sort of humbling. But sometimes I go through Schmoeville and people will comment, did I miss some big announcement or something? I woke up this morning wanting to watch Schmoes Know, and there's only this Harloff and Ellis show. What happened to the main show? I'm just like, where have you been for the past 3 months?
Right. Well,
but then again, I am the host of this show, and I'm forced to pay attention, so you never know.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, listen, we talk a lot of the time on other shows that we're involved with. We talk a lot about it here, sort of putting yourself in the mindset of people not necessarily in the bubble, and I think there's so many levels to that, obviously. We spend a lot of the time talking about people inside this movie fandom bubble and people outside of it, but I think there's obviously levels of just fans and followers of the content that we cover from week to week. I think that represents somebody that's probably not paying attention, and I don't mean anything by this, but they're not paying attention to every single little detail that's going on. I joke sometimes about people like Graham Butler is somebody I always think about in terms of somebody that attempts to watch every single thing that Colliders and Schmoes puts out. And I'm very vocal about the fact that I'm very thankful for fans and viewers and followers like that, but that's not necessarily what's expected of you. I think there is some people that think that that's expected of you. I'm not saying Graham feels like that, but there's also this other sort of realm of people who are more casually taking in the content. My only thing with the comments like that is, and I've been guilty of this before too. I can tell a pretty hilarious story about a podcast that I'm a fan of, when if you would just do a little bit more digging into the question and the statement you're about to make, that you could sort of come to that conclusion and that answer. But, again, I'm giving benefit of the doubt. It's okay. And hopefully people would be respectful with that response and understanding of the fact that not everybody is constantly paying attention to every single thing going on in the community.
Right. Okay, let's open up this pit a little bit, Jay.
I want to see side to side, front to back. Let's pick this shit up.
That's right. Everybody jump on 3.
Okay, I've never given that call at a concert before.
Let's open it up. I think, again, this is sort of a broad, maybe sporadic conversation that we're about to have before we get into this week's episode of Harloff and Ellis, but I think you and I off air have been talking a lot about fan entitlement because lately there's been a complaint that Collider should be a little bit more transparent with their plans as to what's going on and how things are going to be changing from here on out. And I think we could go both ways on it. I think there's a lot to bring up, like the fact that Collider doesn't have to do anything for their fans, but at the same time, it was like before Christmas we got word that there were going to be changes, and then it's like, okay, so when's the follow through? When are you going to update us? I mean, if you're going to bring it up once, why don't you bring it up? Why don't you keep us posted? Like, there's a lot of different variables that we could discuss with fan entitlement, because again, we're sort of in this weird limbo with not just Schmoes, no, but also Collider, because a lot of people were concerned even last week. We got some comments about why we didn't discuss MOVA and Sinead and all of that, and I think, I read the comments, and obviously that was something that we could have brought up on last week's show, because it's been a couple weeks now that they have been absent. But I think one of the main reasons why we didn't bring it up is because we were just kind of playing wait and see. I mean, it didn't really at the time feel like it was something that we had to be that concerned with. And one of the reasons why I am glad we sort of waited to see, what was what, is because, I follow Sinead and MOVA on Instagram. And I think the first time that I realized a couple weeks ago that they weren't hosting Movie Talk, I remember seeing Sinead, I think she was like in Europe or something. And so just by that, I was able to deduce that, okay, she's just out of town and maybe they couldn't get a host this week. So I felt like that was good enough, and I didn't have to raise all of this awareness as to where these hosts were. But eventually, of course, we waited, and eventually we did get some kind of an answer from Ellis. It was vague, but we did get, they recognized that people were concerned about that, and that's something I understand. I think that, we get attached to these people. We become fans of these people, and we feel like we know them, so we miss them when they're gone, and that's one of the things that we can talk about as far as what they're entitled to tell us and not tell us. But I think the question that I had, and I think what's curious about the MOVA and Sinead thing, and they didn't spell it out right away, but it feels like that they're just testing the waters as far as not having a host in general. And Ellis even made some kind of statement that was like, yeah, I don't need someone to read the news for me. I can read the news, and then we can all expand on it. So I think it's simply put, I think Movie Talk is just changing formats to, instead of having, there's 4 seats at that table. Instead of having one just be the host role, why not just have 4 panelists and Ellis can read the news? I mean, I just think that it's a simple format change and nothing else. And I mean, unfortunately, that might mean we don't see MOVA and Sinead as much, but I don't know how much we have to read into that specifically. Do you see it any other way?
Listen, I think we go from week to week on this show discussing, things that we notice, things that we pick out, things that we're observing about Collider and Schmoes, and we're sort of unpacking all of it. We're for better or for worse oftentimes, and I think a lot of fans are doing that themselves, and I think to go against the idea and the fact that a fan or a viewer or a subscriber or whatever you want to call it can't do something like that isn't necessarily, and I'm not saying that that's what you're saying, but I'm just saying that everybody is entitled to do that. Now, however, I have to say there's a big difference between speaking your mind and expressing yourself and expressing your thoughts and your opinions and your views and critiquing the content that you're watching, especially when you're doing it in a more constructive manner. And when there's a difference between that and sort of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Now, what I mean by that is I paid attention to the comment section on YouTube primarily of the Harloff and Ellis show this past week. And we joke sometimes that, the YouTube comment section isn't the best place to be, but I actually think that it's an interesting place to gauge more general appreciation for things, for the sole fact that if you were to just base it off of Schmoeville interactions and Schmoeville comments, that it may be a little bit more heavily skewed towards the positive from time to time. Not in all cases. There's plenty of people out there who can be critical of things in Schmoeville, but it seems like YouTube is just a bigger pull, obviously, because of pure subscriber base. It's a bigger pull to sort of pull from. And when I was going through those comments, I could not have been more just overall disappointed by it. And annoyed. If you do not enjoy Harloff and Ellis, that's your prerogative to not enjoy it. If you like the live show better than Harloff and Ellis, again, that is your prerogative. There's nothing wrong with that at all. However, and I'm going to be completely objective about this because there are multiple, everybody can improve. The fans can improve. Collider can improve. Mark and Christian and all of the Schmoes can improve. We can improve. However, when I was going through these comments, if I'm being completely objective and completely honest, not all I saw, that's a painting with a broad brush. What I saw a lot of was a lot of people who were commenting from a perspective of incredibly entitled and just overtly bratty perspectives and points of view, as opposed, or instead of just straight up giving their take on the show that they were watching. It seems like instead of just addressing the show that they were watching, which was Harloff and Ellis, they went straight to how dare they just completely disregard the live show. I can't believe it's canceled. I saw a lot of statements about it being canceled. I can't believe that they're doing this instead of that. They're only giving us 30 minutes here. My God, how far this show has fallen. This channel is going down the tubes. And listen, first of all, this is facts. This is free content. You have the opportunity to subscribe or not subscribe to it. It's plain and simple. But the thing that I would urge people to do is before you even make a comment like that, at least address what you're actually watching. I saw very few people, and I saw it from time to time, but I saw very few people saying things like, you know what, I really like this show. I like the live show better and I will miss it, which is understandable, right? It's understandable to miss the crew. It's understandable to miss the atmosphere that was generated on the live show. But instead, it was just, fuck whatever this is. I just want to sit here and complain about what I'm not getting anymore. And I think it made it even worse when I came back this week and the temperature of the live show, of Harloff and Ellis, and the comments were statements like, you know what? I'm actually starting to come around to this. And it's like, guys, just trust in I mean, Mark and Christian are almost as OG YouTube movie space personalities as there can possibly be. They know how to do this successfully. Are they the biggest movie YouTubers ever? No, they're not. But they have constantly put out fantastic content to entertain a wide group of people. And all I can say to those individuals is it's not always about you. It's not always about pleasing what your needs are. Yes, you have the freedom to express yourself however you want. You have the freedom to give your opinions and your takes, and you have the freedom to watch it or not. But to sit there and complain because it's not catering specifically to what you want to do, I don't know what to tell you, man. The internet is going to be a really shitty place to be for you because most people don't give a fuck about what you think. So take that and have a nice plate of spaghetti.
Before you keep going and before I continue, I want to address this show in general. And because you said I'm going to be as objective as possible, but I think people might roll their eyes at that because you were the co-host of a show called After Schmoe. So let me be perfectly clear, because I saw it in the comments last week. People are under the assumption that Jay and I are shills and that what we do on After Schmoe depends on the success of the Schmoe's No Live show. And so I guess people assume that we're always going to play nice and play ball. If you are listening to this and you're a fan of the show and you hear someone with that attitude, shut them down, because this show wouldn't exist if we were shills. If this show was just me and Jay this was great, this is fun, then it would just be a completely self-serving show that would have no actual purpose. And that's not the case. And also, don't assume that I don't miss the live show. You know how many episodes I've spent talking about certain interviews and interactions that these people have had, and how many times I've freaked out over seeing Finstock and Brett. Like, If you think I don't miss the live show, you're out of your mind. That's what this entire thing was based on. And so when I defend Harloff and Ellis, it's because I take issue with a lot of the comments that I saw. But when people say, oh, of course Snelling and Jaye are going to defend Harloff and Ellis because they do After Schmoe, their show depends on it. No, Harloff and Ellis is bad for our show. It's bad for After Schmoe. But it doesn't matter because that isn't the point. I think my problem with a lot of the comments, like you said, not only are they bratty, but a lot of them they send so many mixed messages. I saw particular comments that are like, for one, they changed the format of the show so that it's 30 minutes and it's just them two, but Christian had to get up in the middle and he couldn't even finish an episode. What happened? So it's like, do you miss Makuga or not? Like, out of so many people, I miss Makuga on Collider. You had a chance to hear Makuga back on the show with Ellis, but the complaint is Christian sucks. He had to leave. He couldn't even finish the show. What happened? It's like where are we? How are you? What's the barometer here? I find it so difficult to navigate this.
One thing real quick that I think is fascinating about all of this is that at the end of the day, these are two people. That's the other thing that's crazy. That's crazy about this. When people ask, why are they doing this? Where is this coming from? Collider is clearly going down the tubes. Schmoe is clearly going down the tubes. Hey, they addressed all of this. A lot of this had to do with one, a lot of it was schedule, and two, it just simply boils down to the fact that these guys wanted to do this because they missed having a more intimate show. They missed having the more one-on-one, Christian and Mark. And at the end of the day, I go to bed at night thinking that, or feeling great about the fact that these are two guys that entertain me, and they're doing what they want to do, that they are passionate about,
right,
making the decisions that they feel like are best for them. Because I think a lot of people need to take stock in what it is they actually get out of these shows. Is it just a wacky and wild and crazy movie show? Because guess what? There are a million of those out there, but there's only one Mark and Christian, right? So there's what are you here for? If you want this, if you want the live show and discussions about movies, there are so many other places for you to be. But the fact that these guys are just doing something that they feel like is best for their friendship and for their content to be a little bit more fresh, and not because we've been on the show before, again, to go back to the whole shill thing. First of all, we've been on the show multiple times talking about how from time to time the live show can feel a little bit stale because they are doing it every week, which this was sort of not a direct answer to, but it sort of answers that call. And also the whole shill thing is also hilarious to me every time I see it, because we are also heavily criticized for constantly talking shit about people on this show. So which is it? Are we shills and constantly being positive about what's going on here, or are we talking shit? Because you can't have it both ways.
Right. I think the Schmoes are being accused of phoning it in a little bit, and I think you're out of your mind if you watch, especially last night's show. If you watch Harloff and Ellis number 3 and you think that they don't enjoy each other's company and they don't enjoy doing that show, you're out of your mind. The other thing is that I'm just coming from a stance. I'm coming from a place, and I don't know, maybe you're listening to this and you just don't agree with anything Jay and I are saying, but I've always been under the assumption, I'm coming from a place that I never once thought the live show was going away. Harloff and Ellis was, to me, never a replacement, because, again, they addressed it, that the live show was just going to happen less frequently. So it was never a thing. It was always just another show, not a replacement. So I still had the live show to look forward to, and this is just something else. And this something else has actually been something, if you go back into the After Schmoe catalog, I've been calling for a show like this in general. So again, going back to the people that accuse me of being a shill, I've been asking for this fucking show for a long ass time, and I've got it. So I'm looking at it as a completely different thing. And it has, again, why why is this the doomsday? People are throwing it out. I don't think this channel is going to exist in a year. I'm calling it right now. What? Why? Why? What does that mean? It's just another show. Anyway, it's just again, it's going back to sort of bringing back to fan entitlement, and the reason why a lot of these comments feel backwards. And again, this might be sort of like a blanket statement. It might be an overgeneralization because I don't know that it's hypocrisy, because I don't know if the same people are going back on things that they've said originally. It's just obviously there's thousands of people, thousands of comments that I read, but I just think it's funny when there are times when I feel like I am close with all of these people because I watch them every day, and it feels more like they're people that I just want to support no matter what, as opposed to like this big YouTube channel, right? And it's funny that there are other people that don't feel that way at all. Like, when things are good, people have the attitude like, I'll do anything to support Mark and Christian no matter what. But then they turn on them when Christian and Ellis try to do something else. It's like, which is it? Are these your friends that you just want to watch on YouTube in general? Or is this something else that it has to be set? It's like, do you get what I'm saying? I'm trying to think of a way.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I've been a fan of other shows and other productions and content online, especially in the new media landscape, that have undergone changes throughout the entirety of their lifespan, but it's been a little bit more subtle. You can't really notice it. I find it incredibly exciting, and I think it's sort of speaks to the fact that we're both content creators, the fact that I think the Schmoes Know channel and even Collider and in general, because they're still growing. It's a living, breathing sort of thing. It's trial and error and this and that.
I'll tell you what, let's not bring up the fact that we're content creators anymore, because you're absolutely right. That is the truth. But I still think that you and I are being completely reasonable, whether that's the case or not. So I don't want people to use that as a crutch or point their fingers at us like, yeah, but they're content creators. They think they get it. I don't even want that to be brought up, because I think you and I in general are just being completely rational about this.
Right. Well, I mean, I think at the end of the day, it just comes down to being a little bit more sympathetic. There are plenty of people out there who have a similar approach that we do. They're completely fine, that aren't in the same boat as us. Absolutely. I'm more speaking towards why we might be more or maybe not necessarily privy to that sort of approach, but just, again, more sympathetic. But expanding upon that, I think that, listen, again, if I'm being completely objective, there are people who would criticize what we're saying or at least defending their approach by saying, listen, we love this content, we're very passionate about it, and when we watch it day to day and things change without warning and without discussion and this and that, we get upset. And I understand that it's a very honest, a very human sort of emotional response and approach to just be frustrated or upset by things that are no longer existing, especially when you have an attachment to them. I get that. I'm like that as well. And I'm not saying that people can't have those responses, as long as it's just tuned in the right way. It can't just be, again, it can't be throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It can't be just completely devoid of any sort of, productive sort of conversation. The last thing I'll say here in terms of being objective about things, I do think there are things that Collider and Schmoes can improve on a little bit within regards to all of this. I do think there are elements of TV talk, using that as an example. I do think there are elements of that going away that could have been done a little bit better. I think it could have been handled with a little bit more transparency.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're talking about the transparency and the communication between them and the fandom. Is that what you're speaking to?
Absolutely. And I know that I'm sure Mark and Christian and people behind the scenes might say things like, well, we want to keep things close to our chest so that we can unveil them under our own terms. I get that as well. However, when you do have a show that does have even though it might not be the biggest show on the channel, it does have a substantial fan base. It sort of does require like a little bit of communication between the creators and the fan base that, this is in jeopardy of going away, or here's why it's going away. And they sort of did that retroactively. But in terms of the actual Harloff and Ellis show, all of the reasoning has been said. All of the reasoning why it's being done, how it's going to be handled, how they plan to handle it in the future. It's actually been done if you just sort of pay attention to the rest of the content surrounding it.
I brought it up a few times on this show in the past. Sometimes I watch movie talk at my computer where I'm able to see the YouTube live chat. I've watched some episodes of the live show with that YouTube chat up. And I always come back here and say, the YouTube live chat is garbage. It's filth. It is absolute sewage. And it always sort of follow up at that point with, who are these people? Because I don't understand. I don't understand YouTube. I don't understand people that are subscribed to the channel, but they don't actually have any support for these people. They only wait for Wednesday night to come so that they can just get in the comment section and chat. Like, they're only there subscribed to that channel. Like, that has to be the case. Like, there's no other explanation for this. There are so many weird and absurd interactions in that live chat that there are just some stupid-ass people that feel the need to subscribe to something and support it in that sense, but just be there to troll, make sexist, racist comments. Because otherwise, I don't know how you stumble upon the Schmoes No Live show unless you're subscribed to it. So that's always something I've been fascinated and curious and sort of hated about YouTube in general, is that kind of community. So let me just end it here. If you are in the Schmoeville Facebook group, if you are not someone, the person that I described just now, if you're not that person, I just ask you to support Mark and Christian. Like, don't be the people that I just described. Don't just be there. Don't subscribe to the channel if you're not going to truly support what these guys are doing for you, for us. Because ultimately, I think we love these guys. No matter what, I think we care more about, and that's where we are with this whole podcasting thing in general, right? With new media, it's sort of breaking down the barriers of what we knew of, like network television and late night things like there's so much personality and interaction and communication due to content creators on YouTube and podcasting. So it reminds me of when I was in high school. I was friends with this local band, and it didn't matter at all.
Hi, how you doing?
No, not you. It didn't matter at all how good they were. Like, I was like their fanboy, their groupie. I supported them no matter what. And maybe that's not a perfect metaphor, because I don't think that Mark and Christian are inadequate or incapable of being great on YouTube. My point is that they were my homeboys, and no matter what they went through, no matter what they did, no matter if they wanted to change their sound, change their band name, blah, 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 I was always there because I cared more about them than the content. So if that's not you, that's fine, but try to be as supportive as possible. Don't be like those other people that are just confused and hateful and can't play ball, or can't, I don't want to say bandwagon, can't change with the times.
Yeah, I think you're bringing up an interesting topic. I think, first of all, yes, you're 100% spot on. Because the internet makes creating content so much more easy, and it's so much more accessible to so many people. Just because you're watching people on screen that live in LA, that get to go to movies that you don't get to go to, doesn't make them that much different than you. In fact, I think it's safe to say a lot of the people that you watch on Collider, what separates you from them, it's really not that much. And I think just as my dogs go crazy in the background, I think just having that in the back of your mind, the fact that these are human beings too, is important when you're taking in the content, you're actually commenting about it and having commentary surrounding it.
Okay, I just want to end it with this. Be a part of it or don't. And regardless of all of that, you don't have to be a dong. And we also have an opportunity coming up. Because again, Christian and Mark are going to do right by us. And the live show has the opportunity to come back with this whole Patreon thing. And I'm not saying that you have to donate to the Patreon. I don't want anybody to feel like they're obligated. And this show will be the first place that you hear it. We will call them out if we think that Christian and Mark or anybody else make anybody feel bad for not donating. But look, this opportunity has come up, and I think that we're going to get the live show. This is what's going to be interesting, and I don't know if we'll ever bring this up, but it's going to be funny when the live show comes back, or at least comes back more frequently, and more people get on board with the existence of the Harloff and Ellis show as well. It's watch that happen. It's going to happen. People are going to feel a whole lot better about the Harloff and Ellis show if the live show comes back more frequently. It's going to be funny.
There were a few people out there, and this is fine, I guess, but there were a few people out there that were like, "Wait, I like the Harloff and Ellis show. I'd be fine with the live show coming back, but I like the Harloff and Ellis show. It's still gonna exist, guys. And not only that, but Patreon is not dependent on if there will ever be a live show again. Listen, I think we're probably going to be getting a live show in the near future around Black Panther time. I think we're definitely going to get that. And I made the statement to you. I think what's going to solve a lot of this is by the time we are a few months down the road and they've done multiple live shows and every single one is grade A fire and they're all fantastic, I think people are going to start to look forward to them a little bit more once they've sort of completed this cycle of a handful of Harloff and Ellis podcasts and then wrapping it up with a live show.
So let's do what we typically do here on After Schmoe and talk shit. Yeah, Ellis, you're a disgusting human being, and I never want to see you again.
Well, I actually have a different take. I want it to be noted that that's what Ryan thinks about Mark Ellis. I think, to continue on with something that I've said a few weeks now, Ellis on Movie Talk has stepped up his fashion game. My word. Mm-hmm. He is just dressing so spiffy. I'd be curious to know of whether or not that was like something he's consciously done or if that's been more of like a smooth sort of transition. But I mean, he's wearing like sports coats more consistently now. I don't know what's going on below the belt, and I don't mean that in an appropriate manner. Yeah, but
guaranteed basketball shorts.
Could be wearing sweatpants. You never really know. But I think he looks very spiffy. We talked about the Newsies cap the other week, and lately he's just been dressing so nice, and I appreciate it. Now the challenge is on you, Christian Harloff. Get out of that pink t-shirt. Actually, or not the t-shirt. I actually like the pink shirt. I think it was cool.
Yeah, Roca did hold the accolade of best dressed in the office, but that is actually no longer the case. It is now Ellis, at least for the time being.
Yeah, it's more of a mixed bag.
But speaking of Roca, actually more so Schnepp. There have been a lot of really funny interactions this week on Movie Talk, and they've mainly had to do with Schnepp. And this isn't a complaint. I thought it was juicy and really, really kind of fun. There was a lot of bickering between the panelists this week. We had a little bit of it today as well. It was, I think, Jay and Roca today, and you could tell that Clark was the one in the middle that was annoyed with those two. And I think Schnepp and Roca had some bitter back and forths earlier in the week too. And I know that's not something that Ellis is trying to do. I don't think Ellis cares. He wants to just have the best conversation and not incite bickering or arguing or whatever. But it just so happened that this week was one of the juiciest weeks of Collider Movie Talk that I've seen in a while. I don't know how much you saw of that, but it was definitely noticeable.
Yeah, I caught a little bit of it. I think overall Movie Talk has just had a different flavor about it to a certain extent, both because we're sort of into the new year, and I think they are making some subtle changes to the show and to the tone of the show, but also I think the week that Christian hosts, I believe it was the first week of the year, it sort of threw some different sort of wrenches into the works, but I think Mark has been handling it so great, because I don't necessarily think Mark is completely on board with like this whole, whatever the segment is, take it or leave it, or debate me now, you fucking asshole. I don't know what the segment's called, but
right.
I think he's been handling it a little bit professionally, and man, Jay Washington absolutely killing it, continuing to kill it. And I think the one that's flourishing in this whole thing is somebody like Rocha, because Rocha always comes to play, whether it's the type of episode that maybe doesn't warrant so much debate when he's sort of just giving his professional takes, but he's always willing to throw down. That's sort of what you get with Rocha. He's got that sort of firecracker mentality, but it's constantly being backed up with factual knowledge, and that's what makes him such a rich movie talk panelist, in my opinion.
Did you hear Rocha's reactions to the Oscar nominations?
I don't think that I did. No, I'm boycotting the Oscars. That's my take. Ryan Snelling doesn't have that take. He's going to support it with open arms.
Did you not see the title of my Sight and Sound?
I don't know what you're talking about. I think I gave you that idea. So yeah, boycott the Oscars, everyone.
What are you, out of your mind?
A river monster can't win an Oscar.
So anyway, Rocha had this interesting take, and he was the only person at the table who thought this, but he thought that there was a chance that the Oscars sort of skewed their nominations in light of certain recent sexual misconduct allegations. And so Clark and I think Schnepp jumped on him and were like, there's no way that the Academy would sacrifice their integrity by skewing the votes or removing a movie from the you know what I'm saying. And Rocha was like,
yeah,
look,
that's just simply not the case.
Rocha was like, well, why wouldn't they? Like, if it just popped up that somebody became a sexual abuser, why wouldn't they just pull that out? That way they don't have to deal with the controversy. And I don't know which one is true and which one isn't, but I thought it was a perfectly valid point, and they seem to jump on them as if that couldn't happen. But I sort of liked that there was a different approach there at the table, because, I mean, sometimes we might have sort of an echo chamber of just, similar opinions, and I thought that was kind of refreshing. So
absolutely. I think it's actually kind of funny that, we joke sometimes that, oh, Rocha's the old man, but this is like a new age, new media sort of mentality and approach towards the Oscars, I think, but just towards the award show in general. One of the overwhelming, sweeping sort of conclusions for a lot of these award shows, including the Grammys, the Golden Globes, the Emmys, the Oscars, that they're not representative of modern culture. And I like this idea that Rocha is sort of taking things to task, and it never really comes off as, I think it could be easy to be the person that's always the challenging guy. I'm just gonna go against the grain with what everybody's saying, but Rocha's presence on all of these shows, that's sort of what you get with him. I think at this point, if you've spent enough time with John Rocha, you know that he has some more, not necessarily avant-garde takes and approaches, but some things that aren't necessarily, he doesn't really give a shit about what the popular opinion is or even what the reaction is. He's always going to speak what's on his mind, and I don't necessarily think that that's not the case with other people. I think they're perfectly capable of doing that, but he's just a little bit more quick to maybe throw out an idea or an opinion that can at least incite some conversation. He's almost throwing out the challenge, like, here's what I think, change my mind. Like, let's go. Let's have this discussion. And we've been very vocal here that we want to see more talk on Movie Talk. And this is clearly a direct result of our influence on the show.
If you're paying attention to the Sight and Sound drinking game, you need to take a shot because Jay said avant-garde.
Wait, can I stop you real quick just for 1 second? I'm sorry. I have to just point something out. Hashtag transparency. We don't do this normally on after Schmoe. But I need you to know, and I need our listeners to know, that at the beginning of the year, I went online and I went to the thesaurus to look up different words that I can use, because I find myself using the same words to describe things. So I decided to expand my my vocabulary by finding new ways to say different words.
My God. Well,
I say these words too much.
Which would you prefer?
Finger on the pulse. That's a new ear to the ground.
Which would you prefer? Would you prefer to just say the same thing over and over again, or not be able to come up with the words that you need? Because that happens to me a lot. I get ahead of myself and I'm describing something and I realize that I don't have any kind of metaphor or comparison to make my point really hit home.
Well,
I think I'd rather just have the same words over and over again.
There's nothing worse than getting into a full-on conversation. You're just deep into it, and you say something and you realize in the back of your mind that you've used that phrase one too many times already, and then you're just completely thrown off by it. So I'd rather just not know the word. I'd rather be like, I don't know. I would rather be a complete dummy than just keep using the same phrases over and over and over again, which I'm guilty of doing.
Yeah. So anyway, back to whatever the hell we were talking about. I can't come up with words. I love this whole thing that Ellis has against Phantom Thread. He doesn't even call it Phantom Thread anymore. He just says, yeah, the Close movie. That feels like such a small thing, and I think people, for one, it's hilarious. And people probably just shrug it off like, yeah, it's just a joke that Ellis makes. But I think it's more than that. We're talking about the host of a movie talk show that has that attitude about a prestigious film. And, you know, usually we hear Christian and Ellis, they try to be objective and they try to be disciplined and accepting of different movies and different values and things like that. We're talking about reasonable people here. And it feels like when Ellis does that, like
when he does that,
yeah, when he does it, I feel like there's a bit of Ellis that we've never seen before that's like coming out of the cracks and trying to like be less objective and like just talk shit about a movie that he doesn't give a fuck about. And I find that so refreshing because I happen to have the same stance with this movie. It's the least interesting movie I think I've seen in a long time. I have no interest at all in seeing it, and I think normally Christian and Mark would be the first people to be like to challenge me. Really, Snelling? Like, why can't you be accepting of this kind of movie? Movies and films should be an avenue to tell all kinds of stories. What the great acting, the directing. Like, Christian and Mark are usually the people that challenge people when they are prejudiced against certain things that may or may not be reasonable. So I find it refreshing that he's sort of validating that he doesn't have to give a shit about anything if he doesn't want to. Like, I just think am I wrong in thinking that is not just such a unique thing for these guys to do? Or at least Mark and Christian. I don't know. Am I wrong?
It's a little bit of a dong approach to things, if I'm being completely honest, but there's something to be said about just having that unabashed, unashamed sort of take with things. Like, you know what? I just don't fucking care about this movie. I just don't care about it. Like, that's how I felt about like the Ninjago movie. Like, I tried to spin that it looks funny. You know, I don't care. I don't care about Ninja Legos. I just don't care. Some
people might consider it being a dong, but it's not like he's just saying, he's never said like the movie is trash or Paul Thomas Anderson wasn't a good director, he didn't do a good job. He still hasn't even seen it, but I just love how he's so vocal about not giving a shit, because he's like, look, this premise is nothing. It sucks. Yeah. And I'm like, yeah, you're kind of right.
I get that. I get it. I mean, that's exactly how I feel about The Greatest Showman. Somebody asked us in our Facebook group, our Sight and Sound Facebook group recently. They were like, oh, does this movie deserve to get the praise? And I was just like, look, this is a musical about fucking the circus. Well, not fucking the circus, but the circus. I don't care about either of those things. It's not for me. Hard pass. Move on. Move along. Yeah. I appreciate
would like
it.
Christian and Mark to to find a balance. I would like for them to be more like that. Not force it. I mean, just be who you are. But I do think that that's really refreshing and sort of validating, because I think fans think similarly to, or kind of relate to that idea. And it doesn't always have to be so, like, there's so much political correctness on all this shit, and it's like, I may not agree. I may like, I mean, I know people that saw Phantom Thread and they adored it, and that's fine. And I'm not taking anything away from people that loved it or whatever, but I thought it was fascinating and refreshing to hear them just be like, I don't give a shit about this. And it doesn't matter if I host a movie talk show or not.
To be fair,
I just thought that was cool.
Yeah, no, I agree. To be fair, I think that is sort of a classic Mark approach. I mean, it's sort of on brand with what he brings to the table. I think you can go so far to look at the fact that he rated Alien Covenant as one of, if not the worst movie that he saw last year, purely based on his own experience. Yeah. And I welcome that, right? So we talk a lot about, I don't like to consider ourselves critics, so to speak. I think we're more pundits, but we do review things on Sight and Sound. But what it comes down to is our personal opinion about things. I'm not, like, my favorite movie last year was Blade Runner. I don't think it's the movie that everybody should consider as the best movie. I don't give a shit if you think it's the best movie. It's the one that I liked. It's the one that I enjoyed the most. And I think I welcome that here. I think too many people think about their credibility as a film critic, and it's just like, who cares? Again, this is new media. That's a word of the day.
Yeah.
Just like what you like, man, and don't like what you don't like.
Two really quick things, and then we can talk a little bit more about episode 3 of Harloff and Ellis. I want to talk about Makuga's approach to social media, particularly with the Instagram stories. I would like to see him come up with more than just screenshotting the YouTube page of the latest video that goes out. He's screenshotting, the upper third is the frame of the video, and then below it's like the description and all of that, and then he's got a caption or some text on the post. Do more than that, because that is just the notification I get anyway on YouTube, right? And to be fair, not everybody has those notifications, but make your Instagram stories something more special. Like, he started out, there was like a series where he asked everybody a question in the office. I want more of that. Maybe do maybe film part of movie talk, or maybe the pre-show meeting, if you would, the pre-production meeting. Show some of that. Like, show me anything else, but other than a screenshot of the video that I'm going to watch anyway. That's all I'm saying. I think he needs to use that opportunity to bring the fans something new and different.
I actually agree with this 100%. I think Makuga's presence as the social media person for Collider has elevated it purely down to the fact that it's just a more frequent thing. Like, I'm constantly seeing Collider notifications in my Instagram story. But I agree with you. I think Makuga does have some fantastic ideas. I think he's a fantastic personality, and I would like to see him more involved with more creative content on the social media platform. Like, I think we need to remember that social media isn't just a place for people to just regurgitate information that we can get other places. Like, it can be a platform for other things. Like, pitch a show that you can do live on Instagram Live. Do an interview, do a 30-minute interview with somebody on Instagram Live or Facebook Live or whatever the case may be. There's so much content that you can do on these social media platforms beyond what you're already doing. I think he's doing a fantastic job, and obviously he's clearly listening to this, but Christian Harloff, let him know that we would like to see more. Let's see the first ever Collider show that's specifically on social media.
And
follow Gary Vaynerchuk. He's full of fantastic ideas.
He's a creative guy. I'm sure that he could just come up with bits like, oh, I'm going to get coffee for the celebrity hosts, Mark and Christian again, and then he could come back into the studio and they could just have a little bit going or some kind of sketch. It's like, like if you went to Collider's story right now and flipped through all of the images, it's just screenshot after screenshot of every video that they put up today. And I would like to challenge him to add a little bit more. Maybe not replace it, because obviously I know why you're doing what you're doing. I would just like to see you change it up a little bit and add make the Instagram stories the place to be and do something like exclusively special to that format. That's all I'm saying.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm looking at the Instagram page right now, 48.3 thousand followers, which is double the size of what they considered to be a successful video for the top 50 superheroes videos. And I just think there's a huge audience that you can take advantage of there. Maybe take advantage is a wrong word, but even looking at their posts, and 1,500 posts for a company like Collider, it's actually not a lot. Like, I have ex-girlfriends who have more posts than that on their Instagram pages, and it's just like, yeah, I would like to see more than just the thumbnail artwork and this and that. Again, I think he's doing a fantastic job as it is. I think it's better than it's probably ever been. I just think that there can be more done there.
Okay, you don't have to do all that. You made your statement very clean cut. We don't care what Makuga thinks of us or this show anymore, Jay. Did you not get the memo? I emailed you about it.
You didn't email me about it because you would have been emailing yourself, because we share the same email address essentially. But listen, I'm perfectly aware of that. My hope is one day. Listen, I just want him to know that we're talking shit about him. That's all I want. I
was actually unsuccessfully segueing into my next point, but I didn't give you any knowledge of that beforehand. I think it's weird that these people email each other to communicate. I just think it's weird. There's been a couple of instances where I'm sort of just fascinated. We're all the way in Kentucky, so there's sort of a disconnect. We don't really understand fully how they operate over there. I remember a conversation I had on the show before. I've always thought it was goofy how they refer to specific movie theaters by their name instead of just being like, oh, I saw Blade Runner 2049. They'll say, I saw it at the Burbank 16 or the ArcLight, as if it's that different of an experience. And I've always just kind of thought that was funny, because we don't do that where we're from. Actually, I've never heard anybody else do it in general other than them, which is fine. I just think it's funny. But there's been a couple of times where I've heard like the Wangers talk about emailing Mark and Christian and getting a memo about something. And I just think it's weird, because I just assume that all of these people are best close friends. I don't understand why they communicate via email. So Ellis and Clark.
I get it.
Ellis and Clark had an exchange today about like something about Ellis following up about being on Clark's podcast, and Ellis is like, yeah, I forgot to email you back. I'm like, why? Because I don't know, maybe Copster, maybe when Copster talks to us, his first go-to is email, but whenever I want to talk to Copster, I just text him. And so I just think it's weird. I don't know where. Do you know where I'm coming from at all, or do you disagree with me?
No, I actually get 100% why they do it. I mean, I work in a job where people primarily, I mean, I will email the person that's in the office directly next to me for many reasons. One, it's nice to have a paper trail of things in case you ever need to be reminded
That's not
of
the
anything
same,
specifically. If I'm getting technical about it, I mean, there are multiple tools that you can utilize excuse me, within your email to help remind you of things, to create lists and whatnot. And just because of the fact that, listen, when you're working in an office environment, sometimes you want to be left alone and get your work done. And sometimes the best way to communicate with people is to email them directly. You taking a vape over there?
No, I accidentally had an Instagram video turn on my phone.
That sounded like a vape to me.
No, it was a crowd cheering from some random video. I also don't really care for your answer, because you kind of have a point there. I don't know. I just think it's weird. I feel like they're all friends, and if I want to text Chris Hartwell about being on Sight and Sound, I just text him. I don't make it an email. Dear Chris, thanks, Ryan Snelling. So I don't know. Maybe it's not that big of a deal. I don't know. Maybe I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. Let's talk about Harloff and Ellis. Episode 3. Do you have a stream of consciousness notes, Jay? Okay, very good. Christian was on crack here at the start. I love when he acts this way. He fell off a little bit, and when I say fell off, I mean fell off from being on crack. I don't mean he became boring. Falling off from crack means he was just regular Christian, so that's not a complaint. But it happened. Going back to the point that you brought up about Ellis being best dressed, and I don't think this way about anybody, but I noticed his shoes. Did you notice his shoes, and do you know what kind he was wearing?
I'm having trouble remembering specifically what they were. I want to say they were like a Nike maybe of some sort. I can't remember.
Maybe I'll email him.
Okay. So here's one thing I want to address. Speaking on the fellas and their weight and how they feel physically, Mark, you're working out all the time. You look great, buddy. Keep it up. It's fantastic. Christian, on the other hand, sort of being self-deprecating about his weight. Listen, man, I think you look fine. I think you look really good. You're at a, I don't know what you're eating all the time, but you're a busy guy. Sometimes what you sacrifice in a busy lifestyle is your diet, but you don't necessarily have to get down on it. I think you look good. I think you look fantastic. I think you're dressing well. Keep your head up, buddy. You look good.
Jay, let's be clear here. We've seen Christian look way fatter.
I don't know. I've only been watching this for a little while, and he's always looked fine.
I'm fascinated by this idea where Christian, he brought up how he doesn't bring up Star Wars anymore. And he also asked Mark if he was ever over the job that they have. And I thought that was so human and so real, but at the same time, it sort of makes me roll my eyes. And Ellis has the most healthy approach to this. He realizes how lucky he is. It's like when I hear Chris, I get it. If I had that job, and there's plenty of stuff that they deal with that I don't understand. That's totally clear. I don't need to bag Christian for this. It's not that big of a deal. But my first sort of gut reaction when I hear those guys question what they do for a living, I think about, I wonder if they would rather do what I do for a living, because I know for a fact that they wouldn't. So sometimes I want to reach through my screen and just shake them. But ultimately, I get it. I'm not acting like that they don't have their own stressors or anything like that. But
right,
it's just kind of funny.
That's not even necessarily how I really took the conversation that they were having. Listen, I can sympathize 100%. I've talked about it with you frequently. Like, if people want to come up to me and talk about last week's Game of Thrones conversation, I usually just use the phrase that I use all the time. Don't ask. Just listen. I've already talked about this. I've already discussed it. We can have a conversation, but I don't have any desire to just listen to your opinion on Game of Thrones. I just don't. So if you want to have the conversation, the back and forth about something specific, we can do that. But I'm not looking to listen to your podcast, and that's very blunt of me. But that's just how I feel sometimes about stuff.
Hold on. You just said I am not looking to listen to your podcast, yet your reaction to someone when they want to talk to you is listen to my podcast.
That's not what I mean. I mean, some people will corner me and say, "Well, I just want to let you know. Here's what I thought about last night's Game of Thrones episode." Like, that's not a conversation. That's them hijacking my brain to force me to listen to what they have to say about it, when I would much rather get into the conversation. The point I'm trying to make is I love everybody out there, but not everybody has the same sort of interactions as everybody else. It's just like, if you want to have an educated conversation about it, that's perfectly fine. Or the other thing that bothers me sometimes is when people ask me, what did you think about blah, 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 and I have to tell them, well, I already podcasted about that, and you can find out every single thing that you want to know about my opinion by simply going to this link. So now it's not directly related to what they're talking about specifically, but I can definitely relate to the fact that, sometimes you just get a little bit over doing having certain types of discussions. But, it is what it is. It's something that you can't really complain about. But I'm not saying you can't complain about it, but it's something that does come across as a little bit petty.
Yeah.
But again, 2018 is the year of giving everybody the benefit of the doubt.
You and I talk a lot about this on air and off air, about operating outside of the movie space bubble. But that's when I actually appreciate the bubble, because for the most part, I love talking about, I guess Game of Thrones is the example here. I'll talk about Game of Thrones with anybody inside the bubble. But it's uncomfortable for me to talk about Game of Thrones with anybody outside of the bubble. And again, this isn't a burn, but it's just the reality. If my coworker asks me, "What'd you think about the episode of Game of Thrones?" they don't actually want me to say anything more other than it was awesome or it was terrible. Like, if I go on a rant about how inconsistent Tyrion has been this entire season, they look at me and regret ever bringing it up, because I just realized that I'm operating on a different level and I'm looking at it completely differently than some other people are. And that's just the reality.
So there's one other thing, though, and you touched on it right there, is the levels to this whole thing. As Kendrick Lamar would say, there's levels to this game. And there is a certain level when you get into those conversations, and yes, I get it. This is a little bit like snooty and highbrow, but I'm sure there's people out there, especially in the movie space. You get into a conversation with a regular, everyday individual, let's say about Star Wars, and they bring up some information that's just not necessarily correct.
Yeah.
But they're basing their entire conversation about that. So here's what you're risking. You're risking being the know-it-all. Well, actually, what you're saying, and that's just not comfortable to be in. So I'm just like, where is the eject button? Get me out of here immediately.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to sound snooty at all, because, again, like I said, it makes me uncomfortable. It makes me feel bad. It happened this past Christmas, as a matter of fact. I had seen The Last Jedi already, and my cousin, who, he's a casual moviegoer, doesn't care about this shit as much as I do, but he knew that I had seen the movie and goes, "Hey, what'd you think of Star Wars? I liked Force Awakens." And I'm doing this whole thing where it's not what you're expecting, and I'm doing this whole thing, and I can see the look on his face when he didn't want me to keep talking. He just wanted me to say, "Yes, it was good, go see it." And it makes me feel terrible. So I'm not coming from a snooty stance at all. It's just the reality of how we operate. But that's when I appreciate the bubble, is when I can have a conversation with somebody that's on that same level, and we'll get into it as much as I do. But anyway, we'll expand more on that topic on Sight and Sound, because we've completely departed from Harloff and Ellis. I'm with Ellis on speculation, by the way. I mean, I'm guilty of doing it, and I know that he is too, but ultimately it is always pointless. So I love when they have discussions like that. Do you think Patreon has secretly become an inside joke with everyone in that office? Because every single individual there has their own Patreon. And I loved seeing Christian and Ellis just bust out laughing when Patreon got brought up. It felt like there's some kind of inside joke going on over there.
Yeah, I mean, I think, listen, I don't want to get super into this because I'm sure we could spend a lot of time talking about it, but it's interesting. We're talking about bubbles. I think in the Collider Schmoes No bubble especially, it's just a very hot button thing to bring up. I don't think that overnight every single person in the world just decided to jump on Patreon, even though that's sort of what it feels like. I mean, you've got Schmoes with Patreon. We're about to come up with a Patreon. Wangers have a Patreon. I believe Ken has a Patreon. I believe Perry has a Patreon. It's just like Perry and the Patreon with the Perry pants. It's just like so many people are doing this, and I think, and this is an understandable sort of worry, is that maybe if you get into it too late or something, that people have already contributed the max amount that they're going to contribute. I get it that it is sort of a joke at this point that everybody's jumping on board, but it's a platform that allows independent content creators and new media outlets to actually monetize their content, which has virtually been an unknown sort of just Wild West. So I support it, and I hope people are supportive as well.
You're so good at polishing your statements when you don't even have to. I don't know why you feel like you have to polish everything. There was no judgment. I just thought it was funny.
It's important for people to like me, to think that I'm a nice guy.
God, that was great.
You gotta cover your tracks.
What'd you think of this episode? I said it at the top here. I think this is easily the best one of the three so far. Christian stuck around for once. No. But it just felt like it flowed. I always love when it feels like that they just enjoy the shit out of each other, and they did that. I mean, all of that talk about growing up with their brothers and stuff. I mean, you and I, neither of us have brothers. It really made me wish that I had a brother growing up. But the insight into just their childhood and all that stuff. I just really, really loved that conversation. And that is something that you would never get on the Schmoes No Live show as we know it.
Yeah, I think you can typically judge podcasts like this or just shows like this by just how effortlessly the conversation flows. I mean, we're very familiar with when we do after-party episodes on Sight and Sound, just how much fun it can be just when the conversation can go in a million different directions. It doesn't feel so rigid and so just rudimentary, so to speak. It sort of clicked with me this week. One of the reasons why I like this so much, one, because this episode felt a lot like an after party, which is one of my favorite things to do on Sight and Sound. But also, I've talked about it a million times, but I'm a massive fan of Fighter and the Kid, and anytime I talk about that podcast, I always say that the Fighter and the Kid is the best version of that podcast when it's just the two hosts sitting down talking, and that's so much similar to what Mark and Christian are doing here, man. It's just they're having a good time. They're funny guys with comedy backgrounds. They know how to entertain people. Yes, they sort of swerve in and out of movie topics, but I feel like the movie stuff is just a conduit to get people to come in and watch, but what makes you fall in love is just Christian and Mark's personalities.
I'm also very thankful that they still take the opportunity to plug After Schmoe and talk about you and I. And so thank you very much to you, Mark and Christian. But Christian, I loved how he was sort of weary of ruining that surprise of us potentially having Justin Marks on Sight and Sound. That's not confirmed, but it's probably going to happen, but it's not set in stone yet. But I love how he was like, I'm sorry if I ruined the surprise. I'm like, are you kidding me? Talk about Sight and Sound all you want. Like, if I know you're going to bring it up every time we have a guest on, I'll just start texting you lying that we have so-and-so on the show. That way you're impressed, and maybe you talk about it on the... I was like, are you kidding? Why would I care if you bring this up?
Yeah.
Maybe it doesn't happen. Who cares?
Yeah, it sort of caught me off guard, to be honest with you. I was like, oh, we're talking about this now? But it was nice. It was fun. It's funny. It was funny to me to hear them reference the Bureau episode because they didn't really get a chance to talk about it that much last week, if at all. And I'm proud of that episode. And I think, I don't know, it sort of was a reminder, especially when they would reference Cobster or even Cody sort of in the background of these episodes, that they, the crew isn't around as much, so it's interesting. And I personally think that episode sort of broke some ground in terms of, like, obviously we know that some people have like a negative connotation towards us over there in this show, but I think it made everybody seem a little bit more human. And lastly, I just have to point this out before we wrap everything up. I love the background of these Harloff and Ellis shows. I love the orange curtain. I guess we're calling that orange. I love the orange curtain. I don't need pop figures laying around everywhere or a Breaking Bad bus, as we've seen on the Collider mailbag episodes, especially back in the John Campea days. Sometimes just a nice curtain will do just fine. And I think that the background has been on point lately.
It's funny how it's an orange curtain for the Harloff and Ellis show, but it's actually a red curtain on the live show.
Lighting is magic.
They were trying to figure out some bet that they could do to get Ellis to go to Raw. They could just bet on the Super Bowl. I don't know why they didn't think of that. So, there's a big game coming up next week. Bet on the Super Bowl. I think Ellis is going for the Eagles. I don't know if you care about Harloff probably hates the Pats because he's a New Yorker. So I don't know how they would pull that off. But I do know that Ellis is going for the Eagles. So who knows?
You make a score bet.
That's just the easy choice for me, though. Huh?
You make a score bet. Like you bet on what the score is going to be of the game.
Yeah. Okay, you could do that too. You and I share the same YouTube channel. Have you noticed that Sean Astin video keeps coming up on our suggested?
No, I haven't noticed that. It's funny because I remember listening to that going through my history lesson stuff. It was just it was a great interview, but it's sort of just any other interview that the Schmoes have done with somebody in the past. Not trying to be disparaging towards it.
No, I think that's Christian's point too. It's like why this and why now? Why is this? It's right. Funny how even before he brought that up, I had realized that kept popping up. So I don't know what's going on. But I don't know. That's all I got. It's late.
We've petered out.
I literally ran out of notes. My other note was Ellis forgot to mention that Richard Marks took out that guy on the plane with a rope. He had a rope. I don't know what that means, but he did it.
What is this, a game of Clue on a plane?
It wasn't even worth bringing up. See, I'm officially done with after Harloff and Ellis for this week.
Yeah, it was a fantastic week of stuff. It was a pretty good week of stuff. Okay. Glad that the show is back. Glad that people are finally coming around. Maybe not. I think that still remains to be seen. But the good news is I still have fun doing this show every single week.
I think when we do shows like this, Schmoeville, they never respond the way that we want them to. Like, if anything, the conversation that we had at the beginning of the show makes people like us less, at least in my experience. But at the same time, I have noticed, Jay, that we don't get nearly as many thumbs down as we used to. So I don't really know what that means. Again, Schmoeville continues to send mixed messages when it comes to the YouTube comments.
Yeah, I know that some of the stuff that we said at the beginning of the show, it's a little bit, it can be hard to digest for some people. But listen, we're a couple guys. We've been given the task to point out everything in this space, and we do love everybody, but some people need to relax. And that's really the moral of the story.
You want to know my biggest regret from that Beardo episode we did?
What's that?
I told him, now he knows how we record the show the way that we do. And I don't feel like he was deserving of that information, but now he has it. Jaye Williams, where can the people find you online?
You can find me at Jaye Williams, J to the A to the Y to the E on Twitter and Instagram. It's the same for both. Stop by the Sight and Sound, either the YouTube channel, which you can subscribe to. We are very close to hitting our 1,000 mark, or you can subscribe on iTunes or wherever podcasts are found. Also now on Spotify, which probably isn't going to do anything new for us. I heard you talking about that earlier. I've got something to say about that later. Anyways, we're very happy to be on Spotify regardless. Just another place to streamline your content. Also on Spotify, you can listen to my new EP that I just dropped. That's right, I make some music. I don't ever plug that shit around here, but you can listen to that shit if you want to. It's called Some Life. Look it up. Play it loud. Ryan, where can they find you?
Why'd you just turn into Copster there?
I don't know what you mean.
Copster, you know how Copster just exclaims cuss words?
You prick.
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at WhatUpSnell. And, all the same. Jay always gets to do the promos before I do, so I'm wherever he is. Okay, very good.
I usually forget some stuff, so. We have a TeePublic store.
But I didn't actually listen to your promo because I hear it every week, and now I don't know what you said, so I don't know what to plug, and it's all my fault.